The hospital coffee machine made an annoying noise as it swallowed the last coins I had in my pocket. 3 hours after the birth, Sarah had finally fallen asleep, and I desperately needed caffeine to stay awake after almost 30 hours without sleep. As the plastic cup slowly filled, I mentally rehearsed the messages I'd send to our family. Welcome to the world, Emma. Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. The hospital's silent corridor seemed endless on the way back. I opened room 307's door with my elbow, balancing the hot coffee. I smiled, anticipating seeing my 2 girls resting. The room was empty. I didn't understand immediately. The bed was unmade, the blankets pulled away as if someone had hurried out. The mobile crib was no longer by the bed. I looked toward the bathroom, door open, lights off. The maternity bag we'd prepared together for weeks had vanished. They must have gone for some tests, I thought as I walked to the nursing station. My wife and daughter, room 307, do you know where they are? I asked. The nurse frowned while checking the computer. Sarah Matthews? She was discharged. Discharged? No way. She just gave birth. I only went out to get some coffee. Sir, the system shows that she signed a voluntary discharge 20 minutes ago. My coffee hit the floor. What do you mean? She left on her own? And the baby? She took the child. It was an irregular procedure, but she insisted. She said you were waiting in the parking lot. I ran through the corridors shouting her name. I scoured the entire parking lot. I called Sarah's cell non-stop. Voicemail. Undelivered messages. As if she'd vanished from the face of the earth. At the police station, the officer barely looked up from his computer while filling out the report. So your wife left the hospital with your baby. They share joint custody. Technically, it isn't kidnapping. But she disappeared without saying a word. This isn't normal. He looked at me with a mix of pity and suspicion. Have you been fighting recently? Any relationship problems? No. We were happy, eagerly awaiting our daughter. We planned everything together. In the following weeks, I called all of Sarah's relatives. No one picked up. I visited her parents, who pretended not to be home when I knocked on the door. Once, Sarah's dad saw me through the window and immediately closed the curtains. Sarah's mom finally answered a call, only to say she doesn't want to talk to you. Respect that. But what about my daughter? I have the right to see Emma. That's between you two. Don't involve me. And she hung up. I hired a private detective who discovered little more than what I already knew. Sarah had blocked all social media. Her cell phone was off. No bank activity in our joint accounts. She had probably opened a new account weeks before the birth. Every night I looked at the crib we had set up in the room we decorated together. The light yellow walls we painted on a weekend. The stuffed animals neatly arranged on the shelf. A whole life plan that evaporated in 20 minutes. After 3 months with no news, I gave up sleeping on the couch waiting for knocks on the door. I started packing away the baby stuff. Every Odyssey neatly folded, every rattle boxed away, felt like a knife stab in my chest. At first, I kept everything in boxes in the attic because I couldn't bear to throw it out. Eventually, I donated it to a charity. The empty room became an office. I painted the walls white. I bought a new desk. I started working from home to avoid questions from colleagues about my family. People stopped asking about Sarah and Emma. Some friends timidly suggested that I move on, as if erasing the existence of a daughter were as simple as flipping a switch. I visited a therapist who suggested some morning exercises. You're grieving the loss of your family, even though they're alive, he explained. You need to process it like a death. But how do you grieve someone who might be just a few kilometers away? Someone who might take her first steps without me ever seeing her? Who will start talking without me hearing her voice? I learned to live with a hole in my chest. I began cooking meals just for myself. I started watching action films instead of the romantic comedies Sarah loved. I got a dog to keep me company, Atlas, a rescued black Labrador, as lost as I felt. Slowly, I created a new routine. Morning walks with Atlas. Work. The gym. Dinner. TV series. Sleep. Repeat. Life on autopilot, all while trying not to think about what might have been. In the 5th month, while organizing documents for my taxes, I found some old bank statements. 3 months before the birth, Sarah had made several transfers from our joint account to some unknown destination. Small amounts that didn't catch my attention at the time. I trusted her completely. I also found browser searches about how to get sole custody and maximum child support, pages she'd visited while I was at work. I recalled her seemingly innocent questions about exactly how much I earned, whether there were any bonuses she didn't know about. I mentally revisited the last few months of pregnancy. The way she avoided letting me talk to her belly. How she hesitated to discuss names until the very last minute. How she insisted I not be in the room when she had ultrasounds. "It's for luck," she'd say. I want it to be a surprise. The pieces started to fall into place. How was I so blind? How didn't I see that she didn't share the same expectations about our daughter? I remembered her hesitation when we talked about the future, her distant looks as we planned summer vacations with the baby. One night, flipping through old albums to torture myself with memories, I noticed something odd. In every wedding picture, Sarah was smiling at the camera, never at me. In the holiday photos, she kept a physical distance. Even in the pictures from the baby's gender reveal party, her smile looked rehearsed. Atlas rested his head on my lap as I connected the dots of a life built on lies. I thought I had found a partner, but in reality, she was just a means to an end that I still didn't understand. The subpoena arrived on an ordinary Wednesday. The bailiff seemed uncomfortable as he handed it over. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Child support case, Sarah Matthews versus Jack Matthews. She was demanding support for Emma, a ludicrous amount, calculated based on my full salary plus bonuses. She claimed I refused to take on my parental responsibilities and that I was deliberately avoiding contact with her and the child. The audacity left me breathless. She had disappeared with my daughter, blocked every attempt at contact, and now I was the villain? The hearing was set for the following week. I hired a lawyer immediately, explaining my side of the story. "I've seen cases like this," he said, not hiding his regret. "Unfortunately, the system often favors the mother. We're going to need solid evidence." That's when a disturbing thought struck me. I need a DNA test. My lawyer raised his eyebrows. "Do you have any reason to doubt you're the father?" I didn't, until now. "But I need to know. With all this behavior, I need to check if there's something more." He nodded, explaining that we could request the test through the courts. If we can prove that there was deliberate manipulation and concealment of the child, the judge can order the test. In the following days, I organized all my documentation. Bank statements showing the suspicious transfers. Unanswered messages. Call records. The private detective's report. The useless police report I filed on the day she vanished. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Atlas lay beside me in bed, his constant presence reminding me I wasn't completely alone. Tomorrow, after 5 months, I'd see Sarah again. And maybe, my daughter. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, a cold room with faded beige walls and well-worn wooden benches. I sat in the first row, watching the empty judge's desk, trying to steady my breathing. My lawyer organized documents next to me, while I stared fixedly at the door. When Sarah entered, I barely recognized her. Her hair was different, shorter. She wore clothes I had never seen before. She carried Emma in her arms, swaddled in a pink blanket. My heart stopped. My daughter. 5 months old. So much bigger than the tiny bundle I had briefly seen at the hospital. Her curious eye scanned the room without recognizing me. How could she? I never had the chance to hold her. Sarah stared at me with absolute coldness, as if I were a stranger. She sat on the other side with her lawyer, a man in an expensive suit with a calculated look that I later learned was named Brian. She kept Emma turned away, deliberately preventing me from seeing her properly. "Everyone, please rise for Judge Howard," the bailiff announced. The judge was a middle-aged man with a tired expression, as if he'd seen it all. After the initial formalities, Sarah's lawyer began his strategy. "Your Honor, my client was abandoned by Mr. Matthews right after giving birth. Throughout the entire pregnancy he showed no interest, even leaving the hospital at the moment of birth to get coffee and never returning. I clenched my fist so hard I could feel my nails digging into my palms. My lawyer put a hand on my shoulder, silently urging calm. Mrs. Matthews was left alone, vulnerable, with a newborn and no financial support. She tried contacting him several times, but the defendant ignored every attempt. 5 months went by without any help for the child's basic needs. Every word was like a knife in my chest. The complete reversal of reality left me stunned. My client hesitated to file this case, but her financial situation became unsustainable. She needs to provide for her daughter while the biological father lives comfortably, refusing to take responsibility. Sarah was called to testify. She left Emma with a woman in the gallery whom I vaguely recognized as her cousin. When she sat down, her eyes completely avoided mine. "Mrs. Matthews, please describe what happened after your daughter was born," her lawyer requested. Jack seemed distant throughout the labor, she began, her voice calm and rehearsed. "After Emma was born, he looked uncomfortable, restless. He said he was going to get coffee and never came back. I waited for hours. The nurses tried contacting him, without any success. My blood boiled. How could she lie so coldly? Did he offer any financial support during that period?" the lawyer asked. "Not a single penny," she replied, letting a strategically placed tear roll down her cheek. "I used my savings to take care of Emma. I worked part-time while my mom took care of her. I can barely pay the rent." Brian, her lawyer, handed some documents to the judge. "These are records of Mrs. Matthews' attempts to contact Mr. Matthews and a projection of the child's financial needs based on Mr. Matthews' income." When it was my turn to speak, my throat was dry. I took a sip of water, trying to regain my composure. "Mr. Matthews, your version seems very different," Judge Howard said. "Please explain." "Your Honor, I didn't abandon my wife or daughter," I began in a firm voice. "I went out to buy coffee because Sarah had just fallen asleep after 18 hours of labor. I was back in less than 10 minutes and discovered they had vanished. The nurse said that Sarah signed a voluntary discharge, saying I was waiting in the parking lot. I recounted my desperate attempts to contact her, the calls, texts, visits to her family, the hiring of the detective. I explained how I was systematically blocked from any access to my own daughter. I have all the evidence here," my lawyer said, handing a folder to the judge. "Call records, unanswered messages, the police report from the day she disappeared, the private detective's report." Sarah maintained an impassive expression, but I noticed a slight tremor in her hands. The judge flipped slowly through the documents, occasionally glancing at her with an intrigued expression. "And what about the allegations that you showed no interest during the pregnancy?" the judge asked. "I have photos of the baby room I set up. Receipts for the furniture and clothes. Proof that I attended parenting classes. I was completely committed to my daughter from day one." Brian interjected, "Regardless of those details, the fact remains that a child needs support. The law is clear, the biological father is financially responsible." Sarah nodded, looking at the judge with a victimized expression, while whispering something to her lawyer. When it came time for her to speak, she made her first noticeable mistake. With a certain disdain, she looked at me and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Typical. Always a cheapskate. Now he's trying to avoid paying what he owes, as if I were just leeching off his money." The judge frowned at that display of contempt, so different from the vulnerable mother image she tried to project. That brief moment of arrogance cracked the carefully built facade. My lawyer stood up with an expression I hadn't seen before. I realized this was the moment we had planned. "Your Honor, there's something crucial that hasn't been presented to this court yet," he said, his voice calm but firm. "When my client recognized the pattern in Mrs. Matthews' behavior, the planned disappearance, the bank transfers before childbirth, the systematic refusal of contact, he started to question other aspects of the situation." Sarah squirmed in her seat, suddenly tense. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper something in her ear. "In light of the suspicious circumstances, we requested 3 weeks ago a court order for a paternity test. That order was granted by Judge Reynolds. The child's sample was collected discreetly during a routine medical appointment." Sarah's face went pale. Her eyes widened as she stared at the papers my lawyer was now handing to the judge. "The test results, Your Honor, performed by the state-certified laboratory, indicate with 99.9998% certainty that Mr. Matthews is not the biological father of Emma Matthews." An eerie silence fell over the room. The judge adjusted his glasses, carefully examining the documents. Sarah looked like a statue, completely still except for a visibly pulsing vein on her temple. "These test results meet all legal requirements," the judge confirmed while leafing through the report. "Certified laboratory, maintained chain of custody, approved methodology." My lawyer continued, "Your Honor, we believe that Mrs. Matthews was aware of this fact all along. This explains her behavior during the pregnancy, refusing to let my client be present during ultrasounds, preventing any physical or emotional contact with the unborn baby, and finally, her fleeing the hospital before any suspicion could arise." I looked at Emma, feeling a sharp pain in my chest. For 5 months, I had imagined every detail of her growth, dreamed of the moment she would recognize my face, and planned her future. Now, I discovered that biologically we had nothing in common. Even so, she was the child I had prepared my whole life to love. "Mr. Matthews," the judge addressed me, "were you aware of this possibility when you requested the test?" "I only suspected it recently, Your Honor," I replied, my voice rough with emotion. When I reviewed all of Sarah's behavior, things started to add up. She systematically prevented me from bonding with the baby during the pregnancy. She never allowed me to put my hand on her belly to feel the movements. She always scheduled appointments when she knew I couldn't be there. Sarah finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous. The test must be wrong. Jack is making all this up to avoid paying support." The judge raised his hand to quiet her. "This is a state-certified laboratory. The methodology is virtually foolproof for excluding paternity with this level of certainty." "I want another test," she demanded, her composure rapidly falling apart. "You have the right to request an independent second test," the judge replied calmly. "However, I must warn you that it will be at your expense, and there is rarely any discrepancy in such conclusively negative results." "This is a conspiracy!" Sarah shouted, abruptly standing up. "He bought the lab. They bribed someone. Emma is his daughter." Her lawyer grabbed her arm, trying to get her to sit down, but she wrenched free violently. Her eyes were wide, wild, her mask of the innocent victim completely gone. "You are disrupting the court," warned Judge Howard sternly. "I suggest you calm down or you will be removed from the room." "You don't understand," she turned to me, ignoring the judge. "You owe me. We were together for 3 years. You have an obligation to support this child." Everyone in the room watched in shocked silence as Sarah collapsed before them. Suddenly, all the meticulously constructed lies evaporated under the weight of irrefutable scientific evidence. "Sra. Matthews," the judge interjected, "your statements are being recorded. I must remind you that you swore an oath in this court. If you knowingly presented false information, that constitutes perjury." Brian finally managed to get Sarah to sit, while whispering furiously in her ear. She appeared dazed, as if she couldn't believe her plan had fallen apart so completely. "I need a recess," declared the judge. "We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. As everyone got up, I watched Sarah staring at her own shoes, her face contorted in a mix of anger and despair. Her lawyer looked equally shaken, nervously reorganizing papers that were no longer of any use. In the corridor, my lawyer seemed both satisfied and restrained. "Don't celebrate yet," he warned. We're in a good position, but the game isn't over. What happens now? I asked, feeling strangely empty. The confirmation of my suspicions didn't bring the satisfaction I had expected. Most likely the judge will dismiss the child support claim. But there are other issues. Technically, if you signed the birth certificate, there could be legal complications. I didn't sign it, I replied. She ran away before any documents were processed. He nodded, visibly relieved. That simplifies things. When we returned to the courtroom, Sarah was composed again, but her red eyes and smudged mascara revealed she had cried during the recess. Emma was now in her arms, sucking her thumb peacefully, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. I looked at that innocent child, feeling a mix of emotions. For months, I had imagined how our reunion would be. Now, realizing we didn't share blood, I wondered if I even had the right to feel connected to her. Still, my heart ached at the thought of never seeing her grow up. Mr. Matthews, the judge said as we sat down again, would you like to make any additional statements before I render my decision? I took a deep breath, looking at Sarah, at Emma, and then at the judge. Your Honor, discovering that I'm not Emma's biological father was devastating. For months, I believed I had a daughter. I decorated a room, bought clothes, and planned a life for the three of us. When Sarah disappeared with her, I lost not only my wife, but the child I had already loved deeply. I paused, gathering the courage to continue. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for the truth. Sarah deliberately deceived me, fled before I could find out what was really going on, and then tried to financially extort me. If she had been honest from the start, we could have found a civilized solution. Instead, she chose lies and manipulation. Sarah kept her gaze fixed on the wall in front of her, refusing to meet my eyes or the judge's. Her lawyer seemed to have given up, scribbling distractedly in a notepad. I mean no harm to Emma, I concluded. She's innocent in all this. But I also can't be forced to financially support another man's daughter, especially after being deliberately deceived and manipulated. Judge Howard removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, suddenly looking older and more tired. After a moment of contemplative silence, he put his glasses back on and straightened up in his chair. In my 27 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case with such a discrepancy between the parties' narratives, he began, his deep voice filling the silent room. Usually, in cases like these, the truth lies somewhere between both accounts. However, the evidence presented today leaves no room for interpretation. Sarah kept her gaze down, gently rocking Emma as if the mechanical motion could distract her from the words she was about to hear. Her lawyer had stopped taking notes, clearly aware of the direction this case was taking. The DNA test is conclusive, and its scientific and legal validity is unquestionable, the judge continued. Mr. Matthews is not the biological father of Emma. That fact alone is enough to dismiss the child support claim. However, there are even graver issues that must be addressed. The judge methodically flipped through his notes before continuing. Mrs. Matthews appeared before this court requesting child support from Mr. Matthews, swearing under oath that he is Emma's biological father. The court now has conclusive evidence that this assertion is false. Furthermore, Mrs. Matthews presented a narrative of abandonment that is categorically contradicted by the documentary evidence provided by Mr. Matthews. Sarah finally lifted her gaze, her red eyes revealing a mixture of fear and defensiveness. She whispered something to her lawyer, who simply shook his head in response. Mrs. Matthews, the judge addressed her directly, this court considers your actions extremely serious. Presenting false information under oath constitutes perjury, a criminal offense. Additionally, there is evidence of attempted fraud aimed at obtaining a financial benefit. Your Honor, my client was under extreme stress, Brian weakly interjected in a final attempt at a defense. As a single mother, she... Counselor, the judge cut him off sharply, I suggest you do not aggravate your client's situation with further potentially false statements. The documents presented by Mr. Matthews clearly demonstrate a pattern of premeditated behavior, not rash actions driven by stress. Sarah visibly paled, clutching Emma to her chest as if the child could serve as a shield. As for the child support claim, the judge continued, it is hereby dismissed. Mr. Matthews has no legal obligation to provide financial support for Emma, since he is not her biological father and never established a legal bond with the child after her birth. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but there was no real satisfaction in the victory. I looked at Emma, this small, innocent person, and felt an indescribable emptiness. For months, I had imagined our reunion. The reality was so far from the dream. Furthermore, the judge added, "I am referring this case to the Public Prosecutor's Office for evaluation of possible criminal charges against Mrs. Matthews for perjury and attempted fraud. This is a separate matter that will proceed on its own legal course." Sarah let out a small, quickly stifled sob. Her lawyer placed a formal, though not consoling, hand on her shoulder. "Mr. Matthews," the judge turned to me, "you are entitled to file a civil case against Mrs. Matthews for moral and material damages related to this situation. However, I must caution you that such proceedings are usually long and emotionally draining." "I understand, Your Honor," I replied, uncertain if I really wanted to prolong this painful saga any further. "There is one more matter to address," the judge added. "Mrs. Matthews, this court strongly recommends that you inform Emma's biological father of her existence. He has legal rights and responsibilities that cannot be ignored. If you refuse to do so voluntarily, the appropriate authorities may intervene, given your demonstrated pattern of behavior." Sarah mumbled something unintelligible, probably a reluctant agreement. "This hearing is now adjourned," the judge concluded, striking his gavel firmly. As the room began to stir, I watched Sarah hastily rise, avoiding any eye contact with either me or the judge. Her lawyer followed right behind her, already on the phone, probably calling someone to discuss potential criminal repercussions. I sat for a few moments, absorbing what had happened. Technically, I had won the case. I would not pay child support for a child that wasn't mine. Sarah would face consequences for her lies. But as I watched Emma being led out of the room, a sharp pain in my chest made me question what victory really meant. "Are you okay?" my lawyer asked, touching my shoulder. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I guess I'll find out." As we gathered our documents, my lawyer explained the next steps, the formalization of the decision, the possibility of appeals, though unlikely given the evidence, and my options for future legal actions. "Justice was done today," he commented, trying to sound encouraging. "You should be proud of having stood up for the truth." I nodded absent-mindedly, unable to explain that the truth, as important as it was, did not fill the void of what I had lost, or, more precisely, what I never truly had. 6 weeks after the hearing, I sat on a park bench where I used to imagine taking Emma to play. Autumn had turned the leaves shades of red and gold, and a gentle breeze carried the distinctive scent of the season. Atlas rested at my feet, occasionally lifting his nose to watch children running and laughing in the playground. The days following the hearing had been a whirlwind. Local reporters had caught wind of the case. Unusual court cases tend to be local gossip fodder, and tried to get interviews with me, which I declined. Sarah's family reached out, suddenly conciliatory, asking me not to pursue criminal charges and even offering money to bury it all. I refused that too. I later learned through mutual acquaintances that Sarah had moved to another state with Emma. My lawyer informed me that the public prosecutor's office was moving ahead with perjury charges, though she would likely strike a deal to avoid trial. As for Emma's biological father, no one knew if Sarah had contacted him as the judge had recommended. At some point during those weeks, I realized I needed to make a conscious decision about how to move forward with my life. I could nurture the anger and bitterness, pursuing Sarah in court for years, consuming my time and energy on a vendetta. Or I could accept what happened and move on, rebuilding my life without the weight of that betrayal. I chose the harder path, forgiveness. Not for Sarah, the thing she did was unforgivable, but for myself. I forgave myself for not seeing the signs, for being naive, for allowing someone of such little character to have so much power over my happiness. My therapist called it emotional liberation. It wasn't about forgetting or minimizing what happened, it was about refusing to let that experience define the rest of my life. "You can't control other people's actions," he told me in one particularly intense session. "You can only control your response to them." The simple, direct wisdom of my grandmother, who had passed away years ago, rang truer than ever. Don't waste your time bleeding for someone who wouldn't shed a drop of your blood. Her straightforward advice, coming from a woman who had survived 2 wars and countless personal tragedies, had never felt so relevant. A week earlier, I had finally donated the last of the baby items I'd been keeping in the attic. Not to some anonymous charity this time, but to a local shelter for single mothers in vulnerable situations. I handed over the items in person, talking with women who were truly struggling to raise their children, many of them victims of genuine abandonment, not schemers manipulating the system. That afternoon at the shelter offered me a different perspective on my situation. I saw women who, despite all their hardships, didn't use their children as instruments for financial gain. I witnessed real love, genuine sacrifice, and a strength that made my own self-pity feel small. A therapist at the shelter, after briefly hearing my story, said something that stuck with me. Sometimes our biggest traumas are, in fact, detours that keep us from a much more painful road. Sitting on that park bench, I began to understand what he meant. If Sarah had not revealed her true nature in such a brutal way, I might have spent decades with someone incapable of truly loving, raising a child that wasn't mine without ever knowing the truth. The acute pain I felt was, paradoxically, a bittersweet release from a life built on lies. A little girl, about 5 years old, ran past my bench chasing a colorful ball. Her wavy brown hair danced in the wind, and her laughter was pure, carefree joy. For a moment, I imagined Emma at that age, what she would be like, what she might enjoy, what kind of personality she'd develop. It was a sweet, bittersweet thought, no longer as devastating as it had been just weeks earlier. Maybe one day I'd have my own family, a family based on honesty and mutual respect. Maybe not. Either way, I had learned that my happiness could not be dependent on the actions or presence of others. Atlas got up and tugged gently at his leash, signaling he was ready to resume our walk. I stood up from the bench, taking a deep breath of that autumn air, aware that every step was taking me further away from the past. That night, I updated my profile on a dating app I'd ignored for months, not out of desperation or loneliness, but simply as an acknowledgement that I was ready to meet new people. No grand expectations, no fantasies of a perfect family, just an openness for genuine human connection. During dinner, I received a notification from my lawyer. Sarah had accepted a plea deal with the prosecutor, pleading guilty to perjury in exchange for a suspended sentence and community service. Part of the deal included a formal letter of apology, attached to an email. I read the formally clinical document, filled with legal jargon and carefully worded acknowledgements meant to downplay responsibility. There was no genuine remorse there, only the pragmatic desire to avoid harsher consequences. After I finished reading, I closed my laptop and did something that surprised me. I smiled. Not because of satisfied revenge or a sense of justice served, but because I realized that those empty words no longer held any power over me. Like Sarah, that letter had become irrelevant. Atlas came over and laid his head in my lap, as he always did when he sensed a change in my mood. I petted his soft ears, grateful for his constant company during the toughest months. "We're okay, buddy," I said, truly feeling the words for the first time in a long while. "We're finally okay." Subscribe to the channel and hit like to get access to more stories like this. The cycle had come full circle. The wound, though still visible, was no longer bleeding. And in that quiet moment, with night gently settling outside and my loyal companion by my side, I realized I had found something Sarah could never take away from me, the ability to start over, to trust again, cautiously, yes, but without paralyzing fear. Life would go on, with its own surprises and challenges. And I would be there to face them, stronger, wiser, and finally free.